Dr. Mohammad Rafi, Associate Professor, Department of Cyber Security at Institute of Aeronautical Engineering. Today I want to discuss about definitions and terminology on web server and sockets. Here, definitions and terminology on web servers and sockets in a network, the programming and management. The question is, how does web browser communication with a web server? How can establish the browsing communication with a web server? Generally, web browser communicated with a web server through the process called client-server model. Here is client server model. With help of this, the client and server model, generally by using the web browser application, internet web browser, it is a application. With help of this, the application now, we can establish the communication with the web server. Best example is a client server model. Here in this web-based the browser application now, generally we can establish the communication with help of the protocols. What protocols we are using means, now we are using the hyper transfer protocol, that is HTTP protocol, or it is a secure version is a HTTPS. Here HTTPS means hyper text transfer protocol secure. That means data will be securely transferred. Why? Because in a HTTPS now, encryption technology. With help of this encryption technology, data will be transferred or communicated with very high securely. Here is how the communication generally work means. Now, if we see, we are utilizing the DNS lookup. DNS lookup now, when you enter the URL, universal resource locator, that is, for example, URL is a www.example.com or www.yahoo.com, google.com. So these are all the URLs into the browser. That means internet browser other applications. So this is the browser here. What it is doing now, first need to determine the IP address of the web server. Here, if you want to transfer the data from client to the server, so we have to bind the IP address and host number of the particular device. Here is, for example, the IP address is 192.0.2.1 and the port number of this the particular host is 1024 is a port number. So based on this IP address and the port number, generally we can establish the communication. Here actually now, which is the binding, once if you create the socket at the server side or client side, so this IP address and the port number can be bind. After binding the IP address and the port number, then only the server will be accepted for connection establishment. Once the server is accepted for the connection and the establishment, here we can transfer the messages from client to server. Once the communication is completed between the client and server, immediately here the terminals can be, that means terminating the communication with help of the close function or close method. Close with help of the close method now, we can enclose or terminate the communication. Generally it will be do. It can be done by querying the domain name system, that is DNS, domain name system server. So this domain name system server, which translate the human readable domain name into the IP address. Whatever the human readable domain name is there, so that will be translated into the IP address, that is 192.0.2.1. So this is the IP address. And TCP connection. Once the IP address is known, internet the address is known of a particular device or particular host, the browser establishes the connection to the web server using the transmission control protocol. Here now we are using the transmission control protocol. It is a connection oriented protocol. With help of this connection oriented protocol, we can establish the connection between the client and server. Between the client and server. Client and server now we can establish the other connection. So these other connection is made on the port 80 for HTTP or port 443 for HTTPS, that means hypertext transfer the protocol secure. Here is now in HTTPS now we are utilizing the connection, that means the encryption the technology we are utilizing for security the transmission or secure the connection. Generally, these are the connections which is involving a three-step process which is known as a three-way handshaking. Connection establishment between the source and the destination can be done with help of the three-way handshake. So that is three-way handshake or the synchronous acknowledgement and acknowledgement. Synchronous now what we are doing, the client, whenever you are browsing the application, so in this the internet the browsing application, here is the browser sends the synchronized the packets, data packets or the tokens can be sent by the browser to the server. If the data is a bulk amount of the data, generally we can use the packets or other tokens. By the help of these packets and tokens, we can transfer the data to the server. Here is the server acknowledge by sending a synchronization acknowledgement packet and back to the browser. That means the synchronous, whenever now synchronization of the packets are sent to the server, immediately the server what it is doing now, acknowledgement can be sent. That is the synchronization acknowledgement can be sent back. That means acknowledgement means now the browser sends an acknowledgement packet back to the server. Now which is sending the acknowledgement packet back to the server, completing the handshake. Here HTTP or HTTPS request. Once the connection is established with help of the transmission control protocol, with help of this transmission control protocol, so the browser sends an HTTP or HTTPS request to the server. So HTTP or HTTPS. Now always now we are using the HTTPS. Why? Because this the request is a very secure the request now. With this the secure request now, the secure the communication can be sent securely. Whatever the data, whatever the information you are transferring, so which is over the internet the browser application. So the data is a very high confidential or very it is a very secure the communication also. Generally, with help of now, if you are sending the data with the help of the HTTP or HTTPS now, generally now which include the request line. Generally here we are considering the request line and headers and body. So it will be considered. So that means the request line, the method, for example, get or post, the URL path, the path now, and the HTTP version. Here is the header. Header means here data about data. That is the header which is consisting of the data about data. The data about data simply we can call it as a metadata. So this about the request, whatever the request now we are sending, such as the browser type, the application browser type, and the preferable languages. That means what languages by using these are the protocols services are implemented, and if is there any other cookies while delivering this the data, while transferring this data. So it will be included. It will be consist, and the body data to be sent to the server, mainly which is used in a post to request. Here the server or the processing. That means the web or the server which is the process the incoming request That means which is depending upon the type of URL, which type of the URL now which is utilizing for data transparency and communication. That is a server or the processing, and the server which might be which will be the retrieved a web page and the processing the data and querying the data. So all these the thing can be done by the server or the processing. Once if it is a request is received by the client, now process the request and respond back to the other client. So thus that job can be done with help of the server process. Here HTTPS, so the response, how it is responding means generally HTTPS now which is responding, the server sending the HTTPS respond back to the client, which is sending the back to the clients to the internet browser, web-based the browser here. So these are the response now generally which is include the status line. So which include the status line, header and body. Status line, that means here HTTPS version, hypertext transfer protocol version. So these are the version which is not secure the compared with the HTTPS, because here the code, whatever the status code now we are considering, for example 20000 for the success and 404 is not found, the file is not found. That means though with this help of the status line, now we'll get the status of the message. The message, the information is securely transferred or not. That means now we'll know the status of the communicating the message. Header, it is the metadata and body, isn't it? So this is the response now. Rendering now, in a rendering what we are doing now, upon the receiving the response, whatever the response you have received with help of the status line, header and body. Actual body means actual the content. So it is HTML images or JSON data, whatever it may be. It is a body of the message. And metadata about the response means which is the such as the content type, content length, and the caching, the whatever the instructions are transferring. Rendering means here, upon the receiving the response, the browser which the process the content. For example here, rendering HTML, executing JavaScripts or displaying the images, displaying the images to display the web page to the particular user. Closing the connection. Once the communication is successfully completed, now after the data transparency is completed here, so the TCP the connection may be kept open for the further communication. That means now the communication is completed here. Now we can close the connections. The connections will be closed and giving the chance to the further process. If no further process are expected here in case of the persistency the connections. Otherwise here the TCP the connection, TCP transmission control protocol the connection now, which may kept the open for the further communication and giving the chance for the further communication. These are the protocol now which is establish the connection for the further communication. Here this is the closing connection. These are the closing can be done in a network programming and management subject here. So that is a close function. With the help of this close dot in Python here, if you use the Python programming language, close dot close the method. By using this the method now, we can terminate. We can terminate the communication task. Next question is a defined sockets. What is a socket? Socket, it is nothing but a two-way communication link between the server and client over the same network or different network. Here, these are the sockets are an essential concept in a network communication, any networking communication. It may be the same networking communication or different networking communication, which is serving as a end point for the sending and receiving the data across a network. Now which is sending the data or receiving the data across the network. A socket is the combination of the IP address and port number. IP address, the combination of IP address and port number is called as a socket, which together identified a specific process on a network devices. With help of this IP address and the port number, we can identify the particular destination. By identify the respective the particular destination, that the destination now we can directly connect it to the server. So, or we can directly connect it to the particular the source. That means the sender or the device, and the transparency can be done from the sender to the other destination. These are sockets now, which providing the mechanism, the communication mechanism, whatever the two devices are connected, the connecting two devices generally, which connecting two devices now, which is enabling the data exchange. So between them or over the same network or different network. So this is about the socket. And in a socket here, generally we can use the endpoint, two-way endpoint, the communication links. Why? Because here a socket which represents one end of a two-way communication link between two programs. Two-way communication link between the two programs which is running on a network. Same network or different network. Whenever the two devices on same network or different network want to communicate it, need to other communicated, creating a socket first. Now, if the two devices want to communicate it now, so that is a host 1, and host 2, host 2. If these two devices want to other communicate, now before establishing the communication, now we have to creating the socket at this host 1 side, and we have to create the socket at host 2 side. So these are all the sockets. We have to create the sockets. Once the socket creation is completed, then connection will be established. Now we can establish the connection between the source and destination. That means host 1 is acting as a source and host 2 acting as a destination. So which is acting as a destination, source and destination. We are sending the information between source and destination. Here is these two sockets. So what it will do means now, which is sending the data or receiving the data from host 1 and host 2. Both bidirectionally we can able to establish the communication. Here is next the key point of this the socket is a IP address and port number. So it is a very most important in a communication. That means if you want to establish the communication, first we have to bind the IP address with the port number. Each and every network having the port number, and each and every device having the IP address. That means for which device we want to transfer the data. That's why for particular device the IP address, now we have to take the particular device the IP address and the port number of the particular network. So with help of this the IP address and the port number, now we can define the address. We can define the address of the device, and data can be transferred. A socket is uniquely identified by a combination of an IP address, which identifies the devices on a network. That means, and a port number which identifies a specific the applications and process on the device. So this is about the IP address and port number. With help of this IP address and port number, now effectively we can identify the destination device, and the data effectively we can transfer the particular identified device. Types of the sockets. Generally in a network, the programming and management, Now generally we are using the TCP and UDP sockets. So here TCP is a transmission control protocol socket. So here is whenever the connection is connection is established between the two devices. Now we are utilizing the TCP sockets. Here is the TCP socket is a stream socket. Also now we can call it as a stream socket. So these are the stream socket now which is using the transmission control protocol for establishing the communication between the two devices. With help of these the TCP the protocol now we can establish the communication between the two the devices, that is a sender and receiver. They provide a reliable connection oriented services where data is delivered in the same order so it was sent. Whatever the order now we are sending from the source, and the same order the data will be delivered. Datagram sockets, that means UDP. Here is the UDP. So these UDP datagram, though these use the user datagram protocol, which is the connectionless. That means now best the example is a mobile communication. Mobile communication now, here is in a mobile communication we are utilizing the user datagram protocol. With help of this user datagram protocol now, here one mobile device to now can establish the communication from one mobile device to the another mobile device, which is a connectionless and doesn't guarantee the reliable delivery. Doesn't guarantee the reliable delivery and ordering and error checking. So will not give the guarantee for that connectionless other services. But the current connection oriented services now, so will give the guarantee for reliable delivery, and will give the guarantee for the TCP the ordering. By ordering now we are delivering the data. Error the checking also effectively done if is there any errors are arised while the transmitting the data between the client and other server. That means now here, so this is the types of the sockets now. With these two types of the sockets, we can establish the communication over the same network or different network. Socket operations. Generally, while after creating the sockets, generally here we'll perform these operations. What are that operations? Means first creation, binding operation, listening operation, and connecting operation, sending receiving data operation, closing operation. Here is creation. Creation operation is a socket is created using a socket application program interface. This application the program interface now, which is acting as a socket API, acting as an interface between the processor and operating system. Whatever the operating system now which is using, why? Because here whatever the task, whatever the data that the operations now we are going to performing now, so the user level can be implemented at the kernel level of the operating system. It is a core of the executable space. Kernel is a core of the operating system. Now all the instructions can be executed, and after executing now the data can be transferred to the particular identified destination. So such as socket, here is now we can create the socket at client side and server side by using the socket method. By using these the function now we can create the socket at client side and similarly at the server side. Here is this the socket function in many programming languages. That means now we can create the socket in a Python programming language or C programming language or C++. So any programming language now we can create the socket. It is independent of the programming language. After creating the socket now, so we'll perform the binding operation. So binding operation now, which is what it is doing now, which is binding the here which bound a specific IP address and port number. Here particular device, identified device now which is binding the IP address and port number using the bind function. Using the bind function. Now, so which is allowing it to the listen for incoming connections or data. whatever the connections are incoming or data, now which is binding will be the performing. Listening. Here is for server side sockets, whatever the server side sockets is there, for server side socket, the listen function can be utilized. Once the IP address and port number is bind successfully, after completion of the binding operations successfully, now this the listen function is used to wait for the incoming connections, which is waiting for the incoming connections. If it is the server is listen the request of the client, immediately accept, the connection is accepted. Once the connection is accepted by the other server, immediately connecting to server and a client with help of the connect method. So with help of the connect the function, now we can establish the connection between the server and client. So these the connect method or these the connect function is used to establishing a connection to a server socket. To server socket, now we can establish the connection. That means sending and receiving of the data from server and from the client can be performed with help of the send function and receive function. With help of this the send function, we can send the data from client to server. With help of the receive function, we can receive the data from client to server, or used to transmit or receiving the data over the socket on the same network or different networks also. Once sending and receiving data operation is completed, the connection will be terminated using the close function. Here is these are the close the function now, which is indicating successfully the communication, whatever the communication now we are performing between the client and server, now which indicates that successfully the communication is completed. When the communication is completed, generally we can utilize close the function at the client side, same as at server side. Both the side, now we have to utilize these are the close the function. You'll see use cases. Use cases means now sockets generally are used in a various network communication scenarios. Now different types of the communication, various other communication scenarios. Now these are the communication or the scenario in the same network or different network. Now we are utilizing these are the sockets. Generally here web browsing, here internet based the application, web browsing, email, file the transfers, and real time applications like chat, online gaming. So all are the use cases of the sockets. In all the scenarios, now we can utilize the sockets. Here in a summary, now we can say it as a sockets are a fundamental building block for a network communication. For a network communications now, which is allowing different devices and applications to connect. That means now different devices and different applications. Here each and every device, now we are running the different applications. Any the applications now which will be connected, and communication here is the which is allowing for the communication between the different devices over the same network or different network, and which is exchanging the data over the same network or the different other network. Here is the socket. This is information about the socket. Next, what is a socket and how it is works? The working of the socket. Now already we have discussed about the socket. Brief the summarization of the socket. It is a software abstraction socket that serves as a endpoint for sending and receiving the data. It is a two-way communication link. Socket is a two-way communication link. So both the direction and sending the data and receiving the data between these other devices over the network. So it is like a door. That means which data enters and exit. on the network other devices. Just like socket is acting as a door. So suppose if you want to sending the data, opens the socket and send the data, and if you want to receive the data, receives the information and close the socket, open and close, just like as acting as a door, which is now enabling the communication between the different other process, whether they are on the same device or across the different other devices now, which is connected through the network. Here is how a sockets are work means now. First, for working the sockets now, first we have to creating the sockets at both the client side and server side. The first step in a network communication is to create a socket using the programming language socket API. The API, by using this the programming language now, we have to create that. For example, now in a Python, you can create the socket with the socket.socket method. By using this method now, we can create the socket at a client side and server side. Why? Because here generally these whatever the socket dot method now we are using, which is generally, so it can be defined with help of this the protocol. Now we are utilizing the protocols are the TCP protocol or UDP protocol. Transmission control protocol and UDP. This is a TCP protocol now we can utilize for the connection oriented purpose, and UDP the protocol now we are using for connectionless services. The IP address of the host and the port number, IP address of the host and the port number here, which identifies the specific applications or services on the host. Number of the applications and number of the services can be established. Binding now, which is a compress, which encompass the IP address and port number of the particular other device, which is bind the function now, which is binding the IP address and port number. By binding the IP address and the port number with help of this bind the function, with help of this the bind function now, we can identify the destination device. Here, this binds the sockets to a particular network interface and port number. The port number now, binding now, which is allowing the IP address and port number, which is allowing the IP address and port number to listening for the incoming connections or data. Here, which is listening the incoming connections and data. Listening server side. That means now, which is listening the server side. Here is after binding this IP address and the port number, generally the server, the socket now, which is listen for incoming connections. Whatever the incoming connections are the coming now, which is listen the incoming connections by using the listen method. Once if it is listen, immediately with help of this accept method, with help of this accept the function, or with help of this the method now, accept the request. If it is accept the request now, immediately establishing the connection by using connect method. By using connect the function, by using connect method, now we can establish the connection between the client and server. It is wait for the client to initiating the communication. Once if it is connected with help of this connect function, so the data can be transferred. That means here connecting the client side and connecting at the server side. Both the side now will establish the connection. Also here the sockets will be installed or created. But the instead of this the binding here, the client socket uses the connect function. Now connect the function to establishing the connection to the server using the server IP address and port number also. With help of the IP address and port number now, port number of the particular network, now we can establish the connection between the client and server. Accepting the connection. Accepting the connection means now, here is a server side. When a client attempts to connect, the server accepts the connections using the accept function. Using the accept function, which creates a new socket which is dedicated that the particular client server connections. Here is data transmission. Once the connection is established in the case of the TCP, data can be sent and received through the sockets. Through the socket. Here is a data connections. So this is done using the functions like send and receive. Send and receive. So in a TCP sockets, that means send to or receive from in a UDP sockets. That means here these are the functions now we are utilizing for sending the data and receiving the data. TCP sockets. TCP sockets it's a very reliable connection oriented and orderly we are sending the data. It is very reliable. Sequentially we are sending the data. Errors monitoring, very effectively monitoring between the client and server and establishing the communication streams. The data is sent as a continuous flow and the protocol now which is ensures that it arrives intact and the correct order. Now which is arrives in a correct order. UDP sockets now which is provide a connectionless communication model. Generally here, if the communication is a connectionless, the best example is a mobile communication. Now here we are utilizing in this the communication UDP protocols, user datagram protocols. Why? Because it is a connectionless protocols. Here without the connection establishment now the data can be transferred with help of the UDP protocol. Data is sent in a discrete packets, that is a datagrams, without guaranteeing the orders and the delivery. So here in the UDP, while using the UDP, if you establish the communication, you don't give the guarantee for delivering the data to destination. But it is a very faster. Connectionless is a very fast and less reliable, less security also. Closing the connection after the communication. After the communication is completed here, now we can close the socket by using the close the function. By using close function now we can close the connection and end the connection. Okay, and further data transmission is no longer possible. That socket, whatever the sockets we have closed, for that the sockets here, long data transmission is not possible. Examples of the socket communications. Here is the server side now. What we are doing now, server side also now we are creating the sockets, binding it with the IP address and port number, listening for incoming connections, and accept a connection from the client. Here is sending and receiving the data and closing the socket. Client side also creating the socket, connecting the server IP address and port number. So by binding the IP address and port number now we can connect. That means here we can connect to the server, sending the and receiving the data. Why? Because now by binding only we can identify the other device, particular other device. After that now the connection is established. Now we are sending and receiving the data. And closing the sockets. Here for this definitions and terminology, the reference book is a computer networking, a top-down approach by James. Now here, so this is a reference book, 7th edition, 2024. So this is about the web servers and the SOC definitions and terminology on web servers and sockets. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.